My name is Tessa Ellis. I'm 34 years old, and numbers have been my profession for most of my adult life. I manage accounts, organize finances, and spend my days making sure every dollar is exactly where it belongs. Because of that, I know something many people don't. A signature can be worth far more than money. On Christmas Eve, my fiancé's mother stood in the doorway of her beautiful family home and looked directly at my 7-year-old daughter. Then she told her to stay outside. Behind that doorway, her grandchildren rushed past us laughing, carrying gift bags tied with gold ribbon. The warmth of the house spilled into the snow, but none of it was meant for Lily. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply crouched down, straightened my daughter's red mittens, and made sure she was warm. Then I handed that woman a plain white envelope. "Open it later," I said. After that, I took Lily's hand and walked away. We drove home through falling snow. I made her hot chocolate with marshmallows, tucked her into bed, and tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. The envelope was opened at 11:47 that night. By sunrise, there were 79 missed calls on my phone. Not one of them started with an apology. Sometimes people think strength means forcing your way through a closed door. It doesn't. Sometimes strength is realizing you're the reason the door is still standing. And once you understand that, everything changes. I should explain how we got there. The envelope didn't appear because of one cruel comment. It was the result of 8 months of patience, 8 months of excuses, 8 months of records. I run a small bookkeeping and tax business from a converted dining room on Maple Avenue. It isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills. I built it after my divorce when Lily was only 2 years old. Back then, I had $900, a folding table, and a stubborn refusal to fail. That was it. People in our county come to me when something doesn't add up. Missing numbers, confusing paperwork, tax problems nobody wants to touch. I fix things quietly. That became my reputation. And somewhere along the way, it became my personality. I solved problems because solving them felt safer than trusting people. A spreadsheet never lies. A balance sheet never changes its mind. People do. My ex-husband used to joke that I'd rather repair a financial disaster than talk about my feelings. He wasn't entirely wrong. The one exception was Lily. She was sunshine in human form, 7 years old, missing one front tooth, always waving at strangers like she already knew them. She spent hours drawing houses. Every drawing looked almost the same. A bright home, a front door, and every person standing together in the doorway. Nobody left out, nobody forgotten. I kept every one of those drawings. At the time, I thought I was giving her a stable life. What I didn't understand was that stability can sometimes hide problems until they've grown too large to ignore. I met Mark Callahan at a local business networking event I almost skipped. He was 39, confident without being arrogant, friendly without trying too hard, the kind of man who remembered small details. The first thing that impressed me wasn't how he treated me. It was how he treated Lily. During our third dinner together, he sat on the floor and played checkers with her for nearly an hour. He lost repeatedly, very obviously on purpose. And every time he lost, he acted like it was a national tragedy. Lily laughed so hard she nearly fell out of her chair. That night, while I tucked her into bed, she accidentally called him almost dad. Then she covered her mouth and turned red. But I heard it, and so did my heart. For the first time since my divorce, I allowed myself to imagine something bigger. A family, a future. A doorway with more than 2 people standing in it. Mark and I dated for over a year. Most things were easy. He remembered birthdays, brought flowers for no reason, handled little tasks before I even asked. But there was one subject that always changed him. His family. More specifically, his family home. Whenever it came up, something tightened behind his smile. The Callahans were one of the oldest families in town. Not celebrity rich, not billionaire rich, but the kind of wealthy that came from generations of land, reputation, and old connections. At the center of everything stood a white Victorian house on Cedar Hill. It had a wraparound porch, huge windows, and enough history to make visitors whisper when they entered. Mark talked about that house the way some people talk about a championship trophy. Proud, protective, almost nervous. I noticed. My job is noticing things. And whenever a person reacts the same way to one topic over and over again, there's usually a reason. One evening, I casually asked if maintaining the property was expensive. Mark's smile faded. "It's handled," he said. The answer came too quickly, too flat, like someone trying to close a conversation before it started. I let it go. At the time, I was in love, and Lily had already started drawing a fifth person into all of her doorway pictures. A tall man standing beside us and holding her hand. The first time I visited the Callahan estate, I understood immediately why Mark became tense whenever it was mentioned. The house was stunning. It sat at the top of Cedar Hill overlooking the town like it had been there forever. White columns framed the porch. Massive windows reflected the afternoon sun. Every brick, every flower bed, every polished railing seemed designed to remind visitors that this family had history. But despite all that beauty, the place felt cold. Not physically, emotionally. It felt less like a home and more like a museum where nobody wanted fingerprints on the exhibits. The moment we stepped inside, I met Mark's mother, Vivian Callahan, 63 years old. Elegant silver hair, perfect posture, the type of woman who dressed as though a photographer might appear at any moment. She extended her hand. I shook it, and instantly felt unwelcome. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. "This must be Mark's friend," she said. Before I could answer, Mark corrected her. "Mom, this is my fiancé." Vivian paused, only for a second, but I noticed. Then she repeated the words slowly. "Fiancé, of course." The way she said it sounded less like acceptance and more like someone tasting something unpleasant. Before I could process that, Lily stepped forward. She had picked a dandelion from a field during the drive and had carried it carefully the entire way. Now she held it out proudly. "This is for you." For a brief moment, I expected Vivian to soften. Most adults do around children, especially around children offering gifts. Instead, she glanced at the flower, then at Lily, then back at the flower. A polite smile appeared. "We're not really a dandelion family, dear." The words sounded harmless, almost friendly, but something about them landed wrong. Lily slowly lowered her hand. Vivian had already turned away. "Come," she said, "let me show you the house." And just like that, the moment was over. I met Mark's sister shortly afterward, Brooke, 36. Always perfectly dressed, always perfectly informed. The kind of person who could mention the price of something without technically mentioning the price. She gave me a tour of the house. At least, that's what she called it. In reality, it felt more like a guided presentation of family achievements. The antique grandfather clock, the imported dining table, the original paintings, the renovated guest wing. Every room came with a story about value. Then she stopped near the fireplace. "This is one of our favorite traditions." A row of gift bags sat neatly on the mantel. Deep green tissue paper, gold ribbon, perfectly tied bows, everything identical. Brooke smiled proudly. "Every Christmas, Mom prepares one for each grandchild." I counted automatically. It's what I do. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exactly enough for Brooke's children. No extras, no surprises, no room for additions. Lily stood quietly beside me, staring at the ribbons. I noticed her eyes linger a little too long. I told myself not to overthink it. We weren't married yet. Maybe next year would be different. Traditions take time. Families take time. That's what I believed. Mark proposed 2 months later, and naturally, he chose the front porch of the Cedar Hill house. The place meant everything to him. The place I was still trying to understand. The ring belonged to his grandmother. Family heirloom. Beautiful. Meaningful. Expensive enough to make me nervous. I said yes. Not because of the ring, not because of the house, but because of the man kneeling in front of me. The man who made Lily laugh. The man who remembered every important date. The man who made me believe we could become something bigger than we already were. As I slipped the ring onto my finger, I looked toward the house. A curtain moved. Vivian was watching from inside. Her expression looked less like joy and more like reluctant approval. As if she were signing paperwork she didn't particularly like. I ignored it. Love encourages optimism. Sometimes too much optimism. After the engagement, small things began to accumulate. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious enough to justify a confrontation, just enough to create a pattern. At family dinners, Brooke's children received endless praise. every accomplishment celebrated, every story encouraged. Meanwhile, Lily often disappeared into the background, not openly ignored, just overlooked. If she spoke, conversations moved on quickly. If she showed someone a drawing, attention shifted elsewhere. If she accomplished something, people smiled politely and changed subjects. Each incident seemed minor, but together they formed a picture, and I couldn't stop seeing it. One summer weekend, the entire family rented a lake house. There were bedrooms prepared for everyone, carefully assigned spaces, fresh linens, personal welcome baskets. Everyone had a room, everyone except Lily. She was given a folding cot, in the laundry room. Nobody mentioned it beforehand. Nobody seemed to think it was strange. When I raised the issue privately with Mark, he looked uncomfortable. They probably just ran out of space. I stared at him. There were empty guest rooms. They didn't mean anything by it. That became his favorite sentence. They didn't mean anything by it. Every explanation sounded reasonable when viewed alone. But the pattern kept growing. And patterns matter. That's literally how I make a living. One evening I walked into the kitchen after using the restroom. The family didn't know I was nearby. I heard Vivian speaking softly to Brooke. "We'll see how long this one lasts." Brooke laughed. That was it. One sentence, one laugh, nothing more. But I froze in the hallway, because suddenly every cold smile made a little more sense. Every subtle exclusion, every dismissive comment, every moment Lily and I felt slightly outside the circle. I stood there for several seconds. Then I took a breath, returned to the dining room, sat down, and smiled. Because Lily was sitting at that table, and for the first time in years, she looked happy. Children don't notice everything, but they notice enough. And she thought she was becoming part of a family. I wasn't willing to take that away from her, not yet. What I didn't realize was that the real story had started months earlier, long before Christmas, long before the doorway, long before the envelope. It started on a rainy night the previous spring when Mark arrived at my house carrying a worn manila folder and a look I had never seen on his face before. Fear. Real fear. The kind that strips away charm and confidence. The kind that sends people searching for help. He stepped inside, dropped the folder onto my kitchen table, and said 4 words that changed everything. "Tess, I need you." Mark stood in my kitchen looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. The confidence that usually surrounded him was gone. His shoulders were tense, his face was pale, and the folder he carried looked as though it had been opened and reopened 100 times. I made coffee. He paced. Then I sat down and started reading. Within 5 minutes, I understood why he looked terrified. The Cedar Hill house wasn't just struggling, it was in serious trouble. For years, Mark's father had quietly borrowed money against the property. Loans, refinancing, hidden debt, outstanding taxes, second mortgages nobody had fully disclosed. Piece by piece, obligations had piled up beneath the surface, while everyone continued pretending everything was fine. Now the bills had finally caught up. The county had scheduled proceedings. If nothing changed, the family home would be sold. Not eventually. Not someday. Soon. Very soon. I read every page twice, then a third time, because I wanted to be certain. When I finally looked up, Mark was standing by the window, waiting. "Tell me there's a way out," he said quietly. I stared at the paperwork. "There is." His shoulders relaxed slightly, then I continued. "But it's expensive." "How expensive?" I gave him the number. The room went silent. The amount standing between the Callahan family and disaster was just over $90,000, a huge sum. For most people, impossible. For me, devastating but achievable. Years of careful saving had left me with enough. Not because I was wealthy, because I was cautious. I had spent years preparing for emergencies, years making sure Lily and I would never again face the uncertainty that followed my divorce. That money represented security, protection, peace of mind. And now Mark was looking at me like I was his last option. "I don't know who else to ask," he said. The honesty in his voice hurt. I could see how ashamed he felt, how desperate, how frightened. And despite everything, I loved him. I loved his kindness. I loved the way he treated Lily. I loved the future I thought we were building together. So I listened, and I considered, and eventually I made a decision. Most people imagine generosity as writing a check. That isn't how I operate. I believe in helping people, but I also believe in documentation. Those two things are not opposites. In fact, they often protect each other. So I didn't gift the money, I structured it. The debt was paid, the overdue taxes were cleared, the legal issues were resolved. But in exchange, the family signed formal paperwork, a real agreement, a legitimate loan, everything documented, everything recorded, everything legal. The house itself served as collateral. The interest rate was low, much lower than any bank would have offered. The monthly payments were manageable, reasonable, fair. I wasn't trying to profit, I was trying to save them. And I wanted everyone protected, including myself. The signing took place in my kitchen. I still remember it clearly. The same table where Lily colored pictures after school. The same table where I reviewed tax returns every spring. Now it held stacks of legal documents. Mark sat beside me, relieved, grateful, almost emotional. Brooke looked uncomfortable, like someone attending a meeting she wished didn't exist. And Vivian? Vivian looked offended. Not worried, not thankful, offended, as if the very act of needing assistance was somehow insulting. I explained every page, every clause, every obligation, in plain language. No tricks, no hidden conditions, no surprises. I wanted everyone to understand exactly what they were signing. When it was Vivian's turn, she picked up the pen slowly. Then she signed her name without saying a word. The entire time, her mouth remained pressed into a thin line. I remember thinking she looked less like a borrower and more like a queen being forced to acknowledge reality. After the paperwork was completed, I personally filed the necessary documents. Everything became official. The property was protected. The immediate crisis was over. And for the first time in months, the Callahan family could breathe again. Mark hugged me outside the courthouse. Actually hugged me. Tears in his eyes. "You saved us," he said. I smiled. "Just make the payments." He laughed. "I will." At that moment, I believed him. For 2 months, everything worked exactly as planned. Payments arrived on time. Communication was easy. The pressure seemed gone. I started thinking the worst was behind us. Then the 3rd month arrived. No payment. At first, I assumed it was an oversight. People forget things. Life gets busy. A week later, a handwritten note arrived from Vivian. The stationery alone probably cost more than most people's grocery bills. The message was brief. Financial matters had been unusually difficult. Things would be corrected soon. She hoped I understood. Family to family. I let it go. One missed payment wasn't the end of the world. The next month came. Nothing. No payment, no explanation, no phone call, no apology. Just silence. When I cautiously mentioned it to Mark, he immediately became uncomfortable. "Mom feels embarrassed enough already," he said. "She hates owing money." I nodded. "I understand that. Then maybe just give her some time." Time. That was the first request. Then came another, and another, and another. Every month brought a new reason, a new excuse, a new delay. Legally, I could have acted. The paperwork allowed it. The contract was clear. The obligations were obvious. But I didn't, because this wasn't a business transaction anymore, at least not in my heart. This was family, or at least the family I hoped to join. So I stayed patient, month after month. I told myself understanding was the loving choice. I told myself compassion mattered more than strict enforcement. I told myself relationships were worth protecting. What I didn't realize was that every month I stayed silent, they became more comfortable with that silence. The loan stopped feeling like a responsibility. It started feeling like something they no longer had to take seriously. And slowly, almost invisibly, the balance between gratitude and entitlement began to shift. That was when I started noticing something else, something harder to quantify. Every time Vivian looked at me, there was resentment behind her smile. Not dislike. Resentment. At first I couldn't explain it. Then one day it finally clicked. I knew something she wished I didn't. I had seen the truth. I had seen how close the family came to losing everything. I had seen the paperwork, the debt, the fear, the vulnerability, and no matter how much she hated needing help, she could never erase the fact that I had provided it. To Vivian, I wasn't simply the woman marrying her son. I was living proof that her perfect family had needed rescuing, and she hated me for witnessing it. I just didn't realize yet how far that resentment would go, or who would eventually become its target. The tension that had once been directed at me slowly began drifting toward Lily, and that changed everything. I could tolerate a cold smile. I could tolerate being underestimated. I could tolerate being judged. What I could not tolerate was watching my daughter learn that she mattered less. The first incident that truly unsettled me happened in November. Vivian loved Christmas traditions. She treated them like sacred family rituals. Every year, handmade stockings were hung across the massive fireplace mantel. Each stocking carried a family member's name stitched carefully into the fabric. Generations of history hung there, or so I was told. When Lily and I visited one afternoon, the decorations were already up. Aiden had a stocking, Sophie had one. Even Brooke's unborn baby already had a personalized stocking waiting. But there was nothing for Lily, not even a temporary one, just an empty stretch of mantle between two stockings, a blank space where my daughter should have been. At first, I thought it might simply be unfinished, an oversight, something still being prepared. Then I noticed everyone acting as though the display was complete. Lily stood staring at the fireplace. She wasn't complaining, she wasn't pouting, she was simply looking, trying to understand. Children notice more than adults think. Eventually, I asked the question, lightly, casually, trying to give Vivian an easy way out. "Did you run out of room for one more stocking?" Vivian smiled, touched her necklace, and answered in the sweetest voice imaginable. "Oh, she's not officially family yet." The room went quiet, for just a second. Then conversation resumed, as though nothing unusual had happened. I looked back toward the fireplace. The unborn baby had a stocking. My daughter did not. The worst part wasn't what Vivian said. It was how Lily reacted. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She didn't get upset. Instead, she immediately made excuses for everyone, the way children do when they're trying to protect themselves. "It's okay," she said. "I'm not really a stocking person anyway." Then she shoved her hands into her coat pockets and smiled. A tiny smile, the kind that breaks your heart, because you know it's fake. I knew exactly where she'd learned that behavior. From me. From years of watching me stay polite, stay patient, stay understanding, watching me shrink my own feelings to make other people comfortable. Without realizing it, I'd taught her how to disappear. And standing there, staring at that empty section of mantle, I hated myself for it. The drive home was quiet. Lily looked out the window. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, trying not to replay the scene over and over. Eventually, she asked if we could stop for hot chocolate. I said yes. Of course I said yes. And while she stirred marshmallows into her cup, I promised myself something. I would fix this. I didn't know how yet, but I would, because that's what I always did. I fixed problems. What I didn't understand was that the real problem wasn't the missing stocking. The real problem was the environment that made a little girl feel grateful for scraps of acceptance. That night I spoke to Mark, calmly, carefully, the same way I spoke to clients when discussing mistakes. I explained exactly what had happened, exactly why it mattered, exactly why his mother's comment wasn't harmless. He listened, nodded, then gave me the response I had started hearing more and more often. "Mom's old-fashioned." I stared at him. He continued, "She's still adjusting." Adjusting. As though Lily were a furniture arrangement. As though children existed to accommodate adults. I took a slow breath. "The unborn baby has a stocking." Mark rubbed his forehead. "You're making this bigger than it is." That sentence landed harder than Vivian's comment, because it came from him. I wasn't asking his mother to instantly love my child. I wasn't asking for adoption papers. I wasn't asking for special treatment. I was asking for basic kindness, the kind most people offer strangers. Yet somehow, that request kept getting treated like an unreasonable demand. Mark kept talking, telling me to be patient, to give it time, to avoid conflict, to let things settle naturally. The more he spoke, the more I noticed something. He never once said he'd talk to Vivian. Not once. He never said he'd address the issue, never said he'd defend Lily, never said he'd make sure it didn't happen again. His entire strategy was managing my reaction, not solving the problem, managing me. That realization sat with me for days, then weeks. And once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Every difficult conversation followed the same pattern. Something happened. I raised a concern. Mark asked me to be patient. Nothing changed. Repeat. Again and again and again. It was always easier for him to ask me to tolerate discomfort than to confront his mother. I was the cheaper problem, the quieter problem, the easier problem. And because I loved him, I kept proving him right. One evening after another disappointing family dinner, I came home and sat alone in my office. The house was quiet. Lily was asleep. The only sound came from the ticking clock above my desk. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside sat a blue folder, the same folder containing every document related to the Cedar Hill loan. I stared at it for several seconds, then closed the drawer again. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because despite everything, some part of me still believed things could improve, still believed Mark would step up, still believed Vivian might eventually soften, still believed the family Lily kept drawing in her pictures could become real. I wanted that future badly enough to ignore warning signs, and sometimes hope can blind you just as effectively as fear. A few days later, Lily walked into my office carrying something hidden behind her back. She had paint on her hands, glue on her sleeves, and the biggest smile I'd seen all week. "I made a Christmas present," she announced proudly. Then she revealed it, a handmade picture frame built from popsicle sticks, covered in gold paint, decorated with glitter. Inside the frame was a drawing, the Cedar Hill house, every window glowing yellow, every person standing together in the doorway, me, Mark, Lily, and Vivian, all holding hands. Across the top she'd written, "To my new grandma." I felt something twist inside my chest, because in Lily's world, people belonged together. Doors existed to welcome others, families made room. She still believed that. And looking at that frame, I realized she believed it more than I did. End of part 4. I held that picture frame longer than I probably should have. The gold paint was uneven. The corners were slightly crooked. One side still smelled faintly of glue. It was perfect, because it had been made by a 7-year-old girl who believed families were supposed to make room for each other. Lily pointed proudly at every figure in the drawing. "That's you." "I know." "That's Mark." "I know." "And that's Grandma Vivian." I forced a smile. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." She beamed. "Do you think she'll like it?" The question hit harder than anything Vivian had ever said to me, because Lily wasn't asking whether the frame was good. She was asking whether she was good enough, whether her effort would matter, whether she mattered. I swallowed the knot in my throat. She'll love it. It was the biggest lie I told all Christmas, and I hated myself for saying it. But I couldn't bring myself to explain the truth, not to a child, not to Lily. She spent the next several days preparing the gift, wrapping it herself, using what felt like an entire roll of tape, every edge, every corner, every inch. When she finally finished, the package looked indestructible. She proudly attached a handwritten tag. The letters leaned in different directions. A few were backwards, but the message was clear. For Grandma Vivian. Then she placed it beneath our tree, and every morning she checked to make sure it was still there, waiting, just like she was. The week before Christmas, I made another trip to Cedar Hill. Brooke had asked me to drop off several cases of wine for the holiday dinner. The house was buzzing with activity, decorations everywhere, relatives arriving, preparations underway. Everything looked festive, perfect. While carrying boxes through the kitchen, I noticed Brooke standing at the large island. She was assembling Christmas gift bags, deep green paper, gold ribbon, exactly like the ones I'd seen the previous year. I set down the wine and glanced over. Then I did what I always do. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each bag received a name tag, each ribbon tied carefully, each gift assigned. I waited for another bag. One more, the 7th, Lily's. It never appeared. Brooke finished her work, stepped back, smiled. Done. I stood there for a moment, not speaking, just looking, because surely there had to be another explanation. Surely there was another stack somewhere, another gift being prepared, another ribbon waiting. There wasn't. Brooke noticed me watching. "Oh," she said casually. "The gift bags are only for the grandchildren." Then she smiled, the same polite smile I'd come to recognize. "You understand." The statement wasn't a question. It was a dismissal. A polite one, but still a dismissal. I nodded. Because what else was I supposed to do? Start a fight in the kitchen? Demand a gift bag? Beg for inclusion? No. I simply picked up the empty wine box and left. But something changed during that drive home. Because this was no longer a misunderstanding, no longer a delay, no longer a tradition catching up. This was deliberate. Someone had sat down with ribbons, tags, and wrapping paper and intentionally decided my daughter would receive nothing. That takes effort. Exclusion always does. 2 days later, I accidentally discovered just how intentional it really was. Months earlier, while wedding plans were still being discussed, Brooke had added me to a family group text. Nobody ever removed me. I'd muted it long ago. There was usually nothing worth reading. Then one evening, my phone lit up repeatedly while I was washing dishes. A mistake. Someone had tagged the wrong contact. The conversation suddenly appeared on my screen. I glanced down, then froze. The messages weren't about catering, or decorations, or schedules. They were discussing Christmas seating arrangements, specifically the children's table. I dried my hands, sat down, and started reading. The first message came from Brooke. "Kids table, Aiden, Sophie, city cousins." Simple enough. Then another message appeared beneath it. "Grandchildren only this year." I felt my stomach tighten. Then came a reply from Vivian. Unlike everyone else, she typed in complete sentences, slowly, formally, every word deliberate. The message read, "We tolerate the bookkeeper because we must. Let's not pretend the child is family. The table is for ours." I stared at the screen, read it again, then again, each time hoping I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. The words remained exactly the same, cold, clear, permanent. We tolerate the bookkeeper because we must, not because they accepted me, not because they cared about me, because they felt obligated. And Lily? Lily wasn't even considered worth pretending about. For months, I'd tried to explain away every incident, every slight, every exclusion, every uncomfortable moment. Now the truth sat in front of me in black and white. There was no misunderstanding, no confusion, no accidental oversight. There was only intention. I took screenshots of every message, not because I had a plan, not yet, because documentation is instinct. When something matters, I keep records. That's what I do. Afterward, I walked quietly into my office, opened the bottom drawer, and finally pulled out the blue folder. The loan documents rested exactly where I'd left them. Neat, organized, waiting. For months, I'd avoided looking at them. Now I opened them slowly, page after page, line after line, reviewing paperwork I'd practically memorized. Then I reached a section I'd almost forgotten about. A standard clause, one I'd included automatically. The kind every responsible lender includes. The acceleration clause. The language was simple. If payments stopped, the lender could demand the remaining balance immediately. For 8 months, I had chosen not to use it. Every month, I had extended patience. Every month, I had protected them. Every month, I had remained silent. Suddenly, I realized something. The Callahans had mistaken my kindness for weakness, and that misunderstanding was about to become very expensive. I sat alone in my office long after midnight. The blue folder remained open on my desk. The screenshots sat beside it. For the first time in months, every piece of the puzzle was in front of me. The unpaid loan, the missed payments, the ignored obligations, the group messages, the comments, the gift bags, the stalking, the countless excuses. Everything finally lined up, not into a misunderstanding, into a pattern. And patterns don't lie. What surprised me most wasn't anger. It was sadness. Deep, exhausting sadness. Because I had genuinely wanted this family to work. I had wanted Lily's drawings to become reality. I had wanted the doorway she kept sketching over and over again. The one where everybody stood together. The one where nobody was left outside. Instead, I was staring at proof that some people had already decided my daughter would never belong. No matter how kind she was, no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she loved them. The next morning, I met Mark for coffee. I chose a small cafe halfway between town and Cedar Hill. Neutral territory, no family, no distractions, just the two of us. I arrived early. He arrived 5 minutes late. When he sat down, he smiled. I didn't. Immediately, he noticed something was wrong. What happened? I looked directly at him. Christmas Eve. He frowned. What about it? I folded my hands together. Lily walks through the front door with everyone else. He blinked. I continued. She sits at the table. Another pause. She receives a gift like every other child. He shifted in his chair. Tess. I raised my hand gently. I'm not finished. The smile disappeared completely. That's all I'm asking, I said. Nothing special, nothing extravagant, just basic respect. Mark looked down at his coffee, then back at me. You know how Mom is. There it was again. The excuse. The familiar shield. I felt my patience thinning. No, I said calmly. I know how she behaves. That's different. His jaw tightened. I continued. If your mother cannot treat my daughter like a member of the family, then we have a bigger problem than Christmas. The words hung between us, heavy, unavoidable. For a moment, I thought I finally had his attention. Then he sighed, a long, tired sigh, and said the words I should have expected. I'll handle Mom. I stared at him, because I'd heard that sentence before, many times, too many times. I'll handle Mom. I'll talk to her. I'll take care of it. Leave it with me. Different words, same result. Nothing changed, ever. The conversation always ended. The problem never did. I leaned forward slightly. Will you tell her Lily has a place at that table? Mark hesitated, just for a second, but I noticed. Accountants notice hesitation. Yes, he said finally. I'll handle it. Again, the same phrase, the same promise, the same escape route. And in that moment, I realized something painful. He wasn't answering my question. He was ending the conversation. When we left the cafe, he kissed my forehead, told me he loved me, told me everything would be fine. I smiled, told him I loved him too. And I meant it. That was the tragedy. I still loved him, even while watching him fail the simplest test. Stand up for a child who adored him, a child who called him almost dad, a child who deserved better. After leaving the cafe, I drove somewhere Mark didn't know about, an office 2 towns away, a real estate attorney named Ruth Palmer. Ruth had handled property matters for several of my clients over the years. She was intelligent, efficient, and brutally honest, exactly the type of person I trusted. She already had copies of the loan documents. I'd sent them the night before. When I arrived, she handed me a folder. Then she pointed to a specific document. Read this carefully. I did. Twice. Then a third time. Because I needed to understand every word, not as an accountant, as a person. The document was a formal notice of default, professional, straightforward, legally precise. It outlined the missed payments, the outstanding balance, the lender's rights under the agreement, my rights. It also included something important. A 30-day cure period, 30 days to bring the loan current, 30 days to refinance, 30 days to fix the situation. No surprises, no tricks, no ambush, just consequences, fair consequences. Ruth folded her hands. This doesn't take the house. I know. It doesn't happen overnight. I know. They'll have options. I know. She studied me carefully, then asked the question everyone eventually asks. Why now? I thought about Lily, the empty stocking, the gift bags, the messages, the words, let's not pretend the child is family. Then I answered honestly, because I'm tired of being the safety net everyone resents. Ruth nodded slowly, as though she'd heard that answer before. Maybe she had. Before leaving, I asked her to prepare everything, completely, ready to deliver, just in case. When the paperwork was finished, she placed it into a plain white envelope. Nothing dramatic, nothing threatening, just paper, ink, signatures, consequences. I slipped it into my coat, then removed my engagement ring. For several seconds, I stared at it resting in my palm, a symbol of a future I was no longer certain existed. Slowly, I placed it into the envelope too. Then I sealed it and drove home, where Lily was standing in front of the hallway mirror, practicing how she planned to greet Vivian on Christmas Eve. When I got home, I found Lily standing in front of the hallway mirror, wearing her favorite red dress. The handmade gift was clutched tightly in her hands. She had spent days preparing it, days imagining the moment she would finally give it to Vivian. And now she was rehearsing. "Merry Christmas, Grandma Vivian." She smiled, then tried again. "Merry Christmas, Grandma Vivian. I made this for you." Then she stopped and looked at me. "Do you think I should smile first or hand her the present first?" The question nearly broke me, because she cared so much, because she wanted so badly to be loved, and because I knew there was a very real chance she would walk into that house and discover her feelings were not being returned. Still, I smiled. The smile first. She nodded seriously, as if we were discussing an important business strategy. Then she practiced again, and again, and again. That night, after she went to bed, I stood alone in my bedroom. The white envelope rested on the dresser. I picked it up, then opened it one final time. Inside were 3 things: the notice of default, the engagement ring, and a single handwritten note. Just 1 sentence, nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just the truth. I stared at those items for several minutes, then sealed the envelope again. Finally, I made a promise to myself. A simple one. If Lily was welcomed into that house as family, the envelope would remain in my coat pocket. Nobody would ever see it. The future would continue. The wedding would continue. Everything would continue. But if my daughter was excluded again, the envelope would change hands, and so would the future. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in soft snowfall, the kind that makes the entire world look quieter, cleaner, forgiven. Lily woke up excited before sunrise. By lunchtime, she'd changed outfits twice. By dinner time, she was practically vibrating with anticipation. She carried her wrapped present everywhere, wouldn't set it down, wouldn't leave it in the car, wouldn't let me hold it. "This one's important," she explained, as though I needed reminding. The drive to Cedar Hill felt longer than usual. Snow drifted across the roads. Christmas lights glowed from houses along the highway. Lily sat in the back seat, clutching the gift against her chest. Halfway there, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you think Grandma Vivian will hang my picture up?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Where?" "In the kitchen, maybe." She thought for a moment. "Or by the front door so everyone can see it." I looked into the rearview mirror. She was smiling, hopeful, certain. I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think she'll hang it somewhere everyone can see." The second lie. And somehow it felt even worse than the first. As we approached Cedar Hill, the house appeared through the snow exactly the way Lily always drew it. Every window glowing gold, every light shining warmly. It looked perfect, like something from a holiday postcard. Cars lined the driveway. Music drifted through the cold air. People laughed somewhere inside. From a distance, it looked like the happiest place in the county. For a moment, I almost convinced myself everything would be fine. Almost. We parked near the bottom of the hill because the driveway was full. Then we started walking. Lily's mittened hand rested inside mine. Her boots crunched through fresh snow. The wrapped gift bounced gently against her coat. She looked up at the house with wide eyes. "It looks beautiful." It does. And it truly did. That was the strange thing. The outside matched every dream. The inside never quite did. As we climbed the steps, another SUV pulled into the driveway behind us. Relatives from the city. Their children jumped out laughing. They raced ahead toward the front porch. The front door opened. Warm light spilled across the snow. Brooke stood there smiling, and in her hands were the green gift bags, gold ribbon, gold bows, exactly like before. One by one, she handed them out. Each child received one. Each child carried one inside, names attached neatly to every tag. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every bag accounted for. Exactly as I'd seen in the kitchen. No 7th bag, no surprise, no last-minute change. No place for Lily. Beside me, Lily grew quiet. She didn't say anything. She simply watched. Her fingers tightened around mine. I felt it immediately. Children don't always have the words, but they understand patterns, and she was beginning to understand this one. Still, some stubborn piece of hope remained inside me. Maybe there was another gift waiting inside. Maybe someone had finally spoken up. Maybe Mark had handled it. Maybe I had been wrong. I wanted desperately to be wrong. We reached the top step. The front door stood open. Warmth spilled out into the winter air. Voices echoed from inside. Family members moved through the foyer carrying drinks and laughing. And then Vivian appeared. Elegant as always, pearls around her neck, green silk blouse, perfectly arranged smile. The smile remained when she looked at me, but only barely. Then her eyes shifted downward, toward Lily, and everything changed. Vivian stood in the doorway like she owned the night. Maybe she thought she did. The warm light from the foyer framed her perfectly. Behind her, relatives moved through the house carrying glasses of wine and plates of food. Laughter floated through the hallway. Christmas music played somewhere in the background. Everything looked welcoming, until she saw us. Then her smile changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The warmth cooled, the corners of her mouth tightened, and I felt Lily's hand squeeze mine. Lily lifted her gift with both mittened hands. She had practiced this moment for days. "Merry Christmas, She never finished. Vivian moved one hand to the doorframe. It was a tiny motion, almost graceful, but it blocked the entrance. Not completely, just enough. A gesture that said exactly what words hadn't yet said. "You stop here." The foyer grew quieter. People were noticing. Brooke froze just inside the doorway. Several relatives turned to look. Even the children stopped talking. The entire room seemed to lean toward us, waiting. Then Vivian spoke. Her voice was soft, polite, the kind of tone people use when pretending kindness. "Lily, dear." The child looked up hopefully, still holding the gift, still smiling, still believing. Vivian continued. "Your mother can bring your present in later." A pause, then the sentence that changed everything. "You can wait outside. This dinner is for our children." Silence. Instant. Absolute. The entire foyer heard it. Every cousin, every relative, every guest. No confusion, no misunderstanding, no room for interpretation. She wanted witnesses, and she got them. I felt Lily go completely still beside me, not crying, not speaking, just shrinking, like someone had quietly removed all the air around her. The gift lowered slightly in her hands, an inch, maybe two. Enough for me to see the damage. Because children don't need long speeches. Sometimes a single sentence is enough. One sentence can tell a child exactly where they stand, and Vivian had just delivered hers. Publicly, on Christmas Eve, in front of everyone. I looked inside the house. Brooke stared at the floor. Several relatives suddenly found their drinks fascinating. Nobody moved. Nobody objected. Nobody said a word. Then I found Mark, standing about 8 feet behind his mother. My fiancé. The man who promised us a future. The man who had listened to Lily read bedtime stories. The man who let her beat him at checkers over and over again. The man she trusted. The man I loved. This was his moment. Not later. Not tomorrow. Not after dinner. Now. Right now. The moment that mattered. All he had to do was walk forward. Just one step. Then another. And say the words that should never have needed saying. She belongs here. That was all. I met his eyes. And for 1 second, I thought he might actually do it. He took a half step forward, then stopped. Exactly the way he always stopped. Caught between what was right and what was comfortable. Between courage and convenience. His gaze moved from me, to Lily, to Vivian, then down toward the floor. And suddenly I knew. Before he even spoke, I knew. "Tess." His voice was quiet, almost pleading. "Please." I waited. Not tonight. There it was. 3 words. 3 tiny words. And an entire future collapsed inside them. Not tonight. Not when a child was being humiliated. Not when it mattered. Not when standing up carried a cost. Not tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe later. Maybe never. I felt something inside me become perfectly calm. Not angry. Not emotional. Clear. The way numbers become clear when every column finally balances. For months I had been keeping a ledger in my mind. Every excuse, every broken promise, every "I'll handle it." Every moment he chose comfort over action. And with those 3 words, the account closed. There was nothing left to calculate. The answer was final. Slowly, I crouched down beside Lily. The foyer watched. The relatives watched. Vivian watched. I ignored all of them. I adjusted Lily's red mittens where the cuffs had slipped, straightened a loose strand of hair. Then I looked directly into her eyes. "You did everything right, sweetheart." Her lip trembled. Just once. "We're going home." She nodded. Because she trusted me. Completely. And that trust mattered more than every person standing inside that house. I stood back up, reached into my coat, and removed the white envelope. The plain one. The one that had waited quietly through every excuse, every missed payment, every warning sign, every chance I had given them. Vivian looked confused. Clearly this wasn't the reaction she expected. She had expected tears, arguments, begging, maybe anger. Not paperwork. Never paperwork. I held out the envelope. She took it carefully, almost suspiciously. "What is this?" she asked. For the first time all evening, I smiled. A small smile. Calm, controlled, final. Then I gave her the only explanation she was going to receive. "Open it later." Nothing more. No argument. No scene. No speech. Because speeches are wasted on people who already know exactly what they've done. Then I took Lily's hand, turned around, and walked away. Down the steps, across the snow, past the parked cars, away from the brightest house in town. Behind us, murmurs started spreading through the foyer. Questions, confusion, concern. But I never looked back. Because some doors stop mattering the moment you realize they were never meant to open. The drive home felt strangely peaceful. Not because I was happy, not because I wasn't hurt, but because a decision had finally been made. For months, I'd been carrying uncertainty, questions, doubts, hope. Now there was clarity, and clarity is often quieter than people expect. The snow fell steadily as we drove. Streetlights reflected off the windshield. Christmas music played softly through the radio. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Lily sat in the back seat holding her wrapped gift. The gift she'd spent days making. The gift that never made it through the front door. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "Mommy." I swallowed. "Yes, baby?" A pause. Then the question. The question that still hurts when I remember it. Did I do something wrong? Everything inside me stopped. Because that was the conclusion she'd reached. Not that Vivian had been cruel. Not that the adults had failed. Not that she'd been treated unfairly. No. The first thing she wondered was whether she was the problem. Whether she had somehow earned rejection. Children do that. They blame themselves for things they cannot possibly control. And hearing it shattered something inside me. I kept my eyes on the road. Not because I was distracted. Because I didn't trust my face. I didn't trust my voice. But somehow I managed to answer. "No, sweetheart." Silence. Then more firmly. "No, you didn't do a single thing wrong." She listened carefully, the way children do when they're deciding whether to believe you. I continued. "Some grown-ups forget how to be kind." Another pause. "And when that happens, it isn't because of you." She looked out the window, thinking, processing. Then she asked the most 7-year-old question imaginable. "Can we still have hot chocolate?" I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time all evening. "With extra marshmallows." That earned a smile, and suddenly the world felt lighter. At home, I made cocoa, extra marshmallows, just like promised. Then I read her favorite Christmas story twice, tucked her into bed, and waited, because I knew the envelope would eventually be opened. I just didn't know when. The answer arrived at 11:47 p.m. My phone lit up. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it wouldn't stop. Call after call after call. Messages, voicemails, texts. By midnight, chaos had reached Cedar Hill. And by morning, I had 79 missed calls. I counted them. Of course I did. Later, I pieced together exactly what happened. After dinner, Vivian finally remembered the envelope. She opened it beside the fireplace, probably expecting an apology, maybe a letter, maybe a dramatic farewell. Instead, she found 3 things: the engagement ring, the notice of default, and my handwritten note. Just 1 sentence. "You told my daughter she could wait outside, so can your forbearance." According to Mark, the color drained from her face immediately. Because for the first time all year, Vivian remembered something she'd spent months trying to forget. The woman she'd humiliated wasn't a powerless outsider. She was the lender, the person who had quietly saved the family home, the person who had protected them every single month they ignored their obligations, the person who had chosen patience over consequences. Until that night. The voicemails came in waves, first anger, then panic, then bargaining. Vivian called me vindictive. Brooke called me unreasonable. Several relatives suddenly remembered we were family. Interesting timing. Very interesting timing. Then came Mark. Over and over. Apologies. Regrets. Promises. Excuses. Everything I had wanted to hear months earlier. Everything arriving too late. The next morning I listened carefully to every voicemail. Every single one. Then I noticed something. Not one message mentioned Lily. Not one. 79 calls, all about the house, all about the money, all about the consequences. None about the child standing in the snow. That told me everything I needed to know. A few weeks later, the Callahans refinanced the property. The debt was repaid, every dollar, including interest. The legal process ended exactly the way it should have. Fairly, professionally, cleanly. I never took their house. I never wanted their house. What I wanted was respect. And when it became clear that wasn't available, I settled for closure. Mark continued calling for a while. I never called back. The ring was returned through my attorney. The wedding disappeared quietly. No dramatic ending. No final confrontation. Just the natural result of too many chances wasted. Sometimes relationships don't end with a fight. Sometimes they end with a realization. And once that realization arrives, there's nowhere left to go. A few days after Christmas, Lily brought the handmade picture frame into the kitchen. The same one she'd made for Vivian. The same one that never got delivered. She looked at it thoughtfully, then looked at me. Should I throw it away? My answer came instantly. Absolutely not. Instead, we opened it together, removed the old drawing, and made a new one. This time she drew our house, small, crooked, ordinary, perfect. Every window glowed yellow, and in the doorway stood 2 stick figures holding hands, me and her. Then, after thinking for a moment, she added the cat. Nobody left outside, nobody forgotten, nobody waiting for permission to belong. We framed it, and hung it in the kitchen where everyone could see. Several weeks later, while brushing her teeth before bed, Lily looked at me through the bathroom mirror and said something I'll never forget. "So, I didn't do anything wrong." Not a question. A statement. A realization. I smiled. "No, sweetheart." I kissed the top of her head. "You never did." Looking back now, that Christmas taught me something important. A closed door only has power while you're still standing outside asking to be let in. The moment you stop knocking, everything changes. Because sometimes the people inside the house aren't the ones holding all the power. Sometimes they're simply hoping you never realize how much of it belongs to you. And the day I stopped knocking was the day I finally got my daughter and myself back.